be a familiar one. It's classically called the curing of the demoniac. It appears in each of the synoptic Gospels, but not in John. The Gospels can't quite agree as to which community this took place in. It was south and east of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had to cross the Sea of Galilee and go on a journey to get there, which is this is going in and out. I'm just going to abandon it at this point. Jesus has to go on a journey, is the point. He has to, on foot, by boat, travel into a land of the Gentiles and be in unfamiliar territory, taking the gospel message with him. In preparing for the sermon today, I wondered, as they were making a comment about how far Jesus had to go, how far Jesus traveled in his life. Have you ever thought about that? How far Jesus actually had to go on foot? And historians they've calculated everywhere Jesus went as it's described, and they have estimated Jesus traveled 25,525 miles in his life on foot, which is almost exactly, not quite, but almost exactly the distance around the Earth's equator. Fascinating, isn't it? Jesus goes into this land and he finds someone possessed by demons. The Gospels don't agree exactly as to where he was located in the city, but he was there and Jesus cures him. You and I know that the interpretation of demons in New Testament time and in today's time varies. There are things that people would call demon activity in New Testament times that we know now as a mental health issue or as some other issue in life. But I think we have to be careful not to dismiss the fact that demons exist. I may shock you by saying that, but there are some truths in this gospel that are important, that speak to us today, that particularly speak to us now. Some of those truths are: evil exists. Demons exist. C.S. Lewis said, "We want our angels. If we accept our angels, we have to accept our demons. For free will exists across the expanse of creation." I've seen angelic activity in my life. I've seen it in this congregation. I've also seen demonic activity in my life. And I've seen it in this congregation. It's in our world. We face it when we do what Jesus did. We name it. We identify it. We recognize it. The demon in today's gospel was afraid of Jesus because Jesus recognized the supernatural power it had and participated in supernatural power, supernatural holiness in Jesus' case, and named the demon. What is your name? Legion. We can say that as a metaphorical reference to the Roman occupation of the Holy Land at this time. Or we can accept the fact that it speaks to us as to the amount of evil that exists in our world. God's grace is so abundant and so incredible. We sometimes rejoice in that and we forget that evil powers are at work that need to be called out and identified. And sometimes in our lives, situations take place that bring that truth cascading into our consciousness in an incredible way. This week was one of those weeks in America. This week we saw evil. We saw demons at work. Naming them is important. Naming them is also very hard, because what happened in Orlando a week ago is so complicated and so horrible. It involves many faces of evil. It involves hate to a specific group of people in our world. It involves violence, which takes place in our country at the hands of someone wielding an instrument of unspeakable power. It involves domestic violence. It involves abuse. It involves racism. It may involve terrorism. It's incredibly complex, this evil. We're only just learning about it now. But in the weeks and months ahead, we must do what Jesus did. We must be willing to name it and stand against it. And in standing against it, we have to identify what you and I stand for. And that is not complicated. It's just hard. This past Saturday, yesterday actually, I went down and was part of the Pride celebration that took place in the Short North. And I haven't done that in a number of years. The last time I went down was a rather unusual occasion, as the Columbus clergy float was placed behind the Battelle Institute float celebrating technology, and in front of the topless lesbians on motorcycles. Unique positioning, I thought. Wasn't the case this year. But I'm always struck when I go down and am part of that gathering, and it was a huge gathering this year, of the diversity of people. Not only the diversity of race, but the diversity of just how people celebrate being an individual is quite stunning sometimes. And it's uplifting in many ways if you keep cheerful about it as you go along. And one of the ways that I do that is by noticing just how polite this crowd is. I mean, if you're in different crowds a lot, this crowd is a very polite crowd. They seem to be courteous crowd for some reason. And watching the parade go by and all of these people on floats and marching, I was looking at signs. And I love observing unusual signs, as some of you know. And I noticed one in particular I've not seen before. I really liked. It said, "Jesus had 2 dads, and he turned out okay." You know, if we take a strict interpretation of Matthew's gospel and the relationship of Joseph and the lineage of Jesus, and then we also look at that God, there's a theological way to approach that, to celebrate that. Other sign that struck me was, it's not about ideology, it's about love. Those signs were being carried by members of the Reformed Muslims of Columbus. That's the truth that you and I use to respond to evil. It's the easy truth to identify and the hard truth to do. It's a little word that says love. This is the most overused word in the English language, but it's the most important and powerful word in the English language. It's easy for us to say it, and it's hard for us to do it. Yet responding to evil with acts of love are what brings God's kingdom into existence. We're seeing that now in Orlando, as we see 49 people's lives who were cut short. 49 lives that touched so many other people's lives, whose life rippled into our world in ways that we will never completely know. And yet, the outpouring of love for them is what is now beginning to inspire those of us who are watching for it. And so, my friends, as we come to terms with what evil is in our world, as we face demons that are presented to us in our world, in our community, or maybe even in this place, we need to respond out of love for all the goodness God has created in each person, and to do so with a sense of joy and of hope. I began this sermon by mentioning the reality of the existence of demons. And C.S. Lewis wrote a remarkable, incredibly funny little book that I often recommend to people who want to start reading him for the first time. It was written over 50 years ago. It's called The Screwtape Letters. And it's the story of a senior demon who's writing advice to his nephew, who is a junior demon, beginning work on his first patient. So it's all in reverse. And Lewis often said this was a hard book to write because everything had to be backwards. The father below had to be the source of evil, and the enemy above had to be God. But he did it with such finesse. And he reminds us that part of confronting evil with love is keeping our sense of humor, being cheerful, being of good and positive heart. And sometimes, as he writes, the simplest things can be the greatest distraction. And I'll leave you with just this whimsical thought on such a serious day. The patient is starting to think about serious things. He's in the library. He's reading about God. He's wondering, is evil real? Are demons real? What is this great journey we're on? And his tempter, his little demon, is told, don't show him some big theological thought. Don't present him with some book. Tell him he's hungry. He needs a ham and cheese sandwich. And these big thoughts are considered far more approachable when you do so on a full stomach. And before you know it, the book is closed, he's out the door and on his way to the local McDonald's. Food for thought. And prayers for our nation. Amen.
Amen.